Örömmel jelentem be, hogy Ausztria történetének legfiatalabb kancellárja látogatott el hozzánk, hogy megossza nézeteit és elképzeléseit a 2023-as év várható kihívásairól és fejleményeiről. Szeretném felhívni a színpadra Sebastian Kurzot, korábbi osztrák kancellárt, és dr. Szalai Zoltánt, az MCC főigazgatóját. Fogadják őket nagy szeretettel!
Dear Mr. Kurz, Sebastian, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation of Matthias Kornus Collegium to MCC Fest. What are your first impressions about MCC Fest? You arrived some minutes ago, but how are your first feelings about being here?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. To be honest, it's very impressive. Yeah, it's extremely crowded. I only arrived 15 minutes ago. But everywhere we walked around was super crowded. So congratulations on organizing this festival, bringing so many people together, and very happy to be here for the first time. Finally, after a few invitations, we made it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that many of us here are following your career with great interest, and how you have risen to one of the top European politicians in a very short time. At the age of 25, but please correct me, you were already State Secretary in the Interior Ministry. At the age of 27, Foreign Minister. At the age of 31, President of the Austrian People's Party, the Österreichische Volkspartei. And then for 3 years in total, 2 times Chancellor of the Second Republic of Austria. In 2021, you resigned as Chancellor and retired from politics. Currently, you are working in the industry and building your career there, but you are 36 years old and your career is far from being over. Let me start with a more personal question. Do you miss politics?
It's a difficult question because I always enjoyed it a lot. I love to work in politics. I love to work with my team. As you said, it was quite a while, more than 10 years in government with the best team. And of course, we had the impression that we were able to contribute to our country, which is something incredible. And so I look back with very positive feelings, but at the same time, to be honest, after such a long time in politics, I started very early, I started at a young age, I never did something else before. It also is very interesting to do something different now. So to be honest, at the moment I pretty much enjoy what I'm doing now. It's also kind of going out of your own comfort zone, because after 10 years in government you have a lot of experience. Being the first year in the private sector is something totally different, and of course I'm thankful for the experience from the political sector, but I'm quite new in the private sector, so it's both. It's a good learning curve at the moment, but also giving up a bit their own comfort zone, which is I think quite good at this part of time.
And what was the best and what was the worst being a politician?
I think the worst is probably that you are always in a kind of internal political fight, and that especially if you are leading a government, every single day you get reminded that it doesn't matter what you do, there will always be criticism, not because what you do is wrong or bad, but just because of the fact that other politicians and parties are not happy that you are in this position and not they are. So that's probably kind of the downside of our democratic system, and that by far the best is that you can work for your country, for the people, that you can contribute, that you can do small steps in the right direction, and this is definitely something that feels very good.
You've been part of both a coalition with a right-wing party and a left-wing party. Which one was easier to go on with?
easier is an easy question, yeah. So it was definitely easier to work together with the far-right party because I think there was more overlap on many issues. So in this coalition, we were able to do a lot of reforms. We tried to cut red tape, we changed the labor law, we reduced the taxes, created a more family-friendly tax system in Austria. So we were able to do a lot in a short period of time. With the Green Party, it was definitely a bit more difficult. And of course, in this coalition, the main issue was the fight against the pandemic. So this was our main focus in these years. But to be honest, I would summarize that every coalition has its upsides and its downsides. It's difficult to answer because no matter which coalition partner you have, there will always be more positive and also more negative aspects.
We were discussing that you came to politics at a very young age, and you came to politics, to international politics, in a very young age. So you dealt with politicians who are 20, sometimes 30 years older than you. How was your experience? Is it an advantage or a disadvantage for you? Was it an advantage or disadvantage for you to be so young and sit on the same table with Chancellor Merkel or Ursula von der Leyen or Emmanuel Macron?
So I would say when I started in government at the age of 24, the age was definitely a disadvantage because there was a huge media coverage against me. It was extremely difficult to start at such a young age. And so I would say at the beginning, the age was a disadvantage. When I became foreign minister a few years later, I had the expectation that the young age would be a disadvantage, but it was the other way around. Austria is a small country, and because of my young age, there was a lot of interest. So there were many foreign ministers from huge countries who said, "Oh, look, this guy is half my age. I would like to meet him. Yeah, don't know a lot about Austria, but I would like to meet him." So it was probably at the beginning as foreign minister, it was an advantage. And then when I took over the party, I think at this time it doesn't matter if you are young or older or male or female. It's the question if you have the support of the people, if you get elected or not. And the age is not relevant for this question.
What have you learned from European politicians who are much older than you? Do you have special memories about some of them, or do you have very good memories and experience with some of them? Who do you admire the most?
No, I work together extremely well with many at the European level, and I would say that of course, for me, it was always interesting to work together with those who had a lot of experience. So I always enjoyed it when there were debates in the European Council between Viktor Orban, Angela Merkel, Mark Rutte, so those who were able to say something about how it was 10 or 20 years ago, or when Viktor Orban was the first time Prime Minister. So especially if you're young, this is extremely interesting because it's an experience you can't have yourself, and so I always enjoyed listening to stories from the past and how it was in the probably good old days.
As a foreign minister, you were one of the first European politicians to express criticism against the influx during the 2015 migration crisis, and played a role in closing the Balkan route. How do you look back on that time?
This was a super difficult time, and I will never forget how tough it was to fight against illegal migration in these days. In 2015, the migrants who came illegally to Austria were welcomed. There were welcome refugee signs everywhere. And I was among the first politicians who said that it will be extremely difficult to integrate all these people, and that we should stop the flow of illegal migrants, and that we should decide who is allowed to come to Austria and not the smugglers should decide, which was extremely unpopular in these days. So I was hugely criticized. I always had the impression that my position was quite rational and not aggressive or racist, but of course many tried to put me in a corner where I didn't want to be, and I thought it was pretty unfair. In the last few years, I would say the opinion totally changed. Yeah, all those or many of those who criticized this position 5 years ago or 7 years ago or 8 years ago now support this position, and many of them even use the same terms and the same wordings like we had in these days. So I would say the public debate changed a lot, which is good. The mindset of most politicians in Europe changed a lot, but I think it's still important that there is also action and not only nice words, because the number of illegal immigrants coming to Europe is still high. It's not as high as in 2015, but it's still a problem. The external border is still not very secure. Smugglers are still earning a lot of money. There are still people dying on their way to Europe. So I think there's still a lot of work to do. And I think that the system, like we have it, is still not functional. So there has to be a change of system on a European level. But I'm happy that the approach of many politicians has changed, that it's now much easier to have these positions than it was in the past. And I'm pretty thankful that we work together very well with Hungary and many Eastern European friends in these days, with Viktor Orban, with Péter Szijjártó and many others.
How was the work with Viktor Orban and Péter Szijjártó in those days?
I was foreign minister in these days, so I worked together with Péter Szijjártó, and it was an excellent cooperation. So I think we were among the first who warned or tried to warn in Brussels that this system is not going to work, yeah, and that countries, and especially the European Union as a whole, has to decide who is allowed to live here, and not the smugglers should take these decisions, which was controversial in these days, and is, thanks God, much more mainstream today.
Probably it is one of the reasons of the divideness in Europe, because there are countries, the former communist countries, where there is basically no migration background population in the country, and there are countries just like Austria and Germany and France where you have big populations with migration backgrounds who are now citizens or mainly citizens of your countries, and to find a proper united European solution in this question is very difficult. Do you think, is it necessary to have a united European decision in this, or can it be possible that Poland or Slovakia or Hungary have a different opinion about this question?
No, I think it's important to have both. Yeah, of course you have a rule-based system on a European level, because there is Schengen and there's the Dublin system, so there's always the need to have a system for the European Union. But of course, I think on the other hand, there should be a lot of room for countries to decide for themselves what is good for them and what not. And as you said, you can't compare Hungary to Austria. Austria is extremely diverse. We had a lot of migration. We have with a lot of diversity, and we have many people who came to our country and integrated extremely well. And of course, many of them also contributed a lot to our economic success. But there's a big difference. There's a big difference between people who come legally to work in a country and to contribute, and people who come illegally, probably don't get a positive asylum decision, and can't and do not contribute to the society. So I think it's if we talk about migration, it's extremely important to distinguish between legal migration and illegal migration, between people who come for work or people who come as refugees. So it's not all the same. Yeah.
How do you see the relationship between Hungary and Austria? How was your experience, for example, working together with Viktor Orbán and with the Hungarian government when you were chancellor?
No, I think that there is a pretty good relationship between Austria and Hungary now, and there was always a good relationship in the past. Of course, Austria was and is not a member of the Visegrad Group, but we always had close contacts to our eastern neighbors, also close contact to the Visegrad Group. And I think for Austria, it has always been good to be kind of a bridge between the East and the West, and to use our geographic position as a bridge builder sometimes. So I can't complain about the relationship between our two countries. I think it's pretty good, and I think it's good for both sides to have economic exchange of people. That's how it should be.
We are both members, so both countries are members of the European Union. When we entered, Hungary entered 2004, Austria in the 90s. That was a very much different European Union and a very much different Europe. Since the migration crisis and then the COVID crisis and more recently the Russia-Ukraine war showed probably a lack of shared vision in the European Union. And also, if we look on the global map, the US, the rising of Asia, so the global map is also changing. What will be the future role of Europe in the global world? And there is the discussion about that Europe is declining, Europe is losing its power. Do you see this problem? Is it a real problem, you think?
I think the main goal has to be economic success. So economic success is the basis for jobs, is the basis for wealth, for good living conditions, is the basis to pay our systems, no matter if it's schools, hospitals, rents, or whatever. So I think from my perspective, economic success and staying competitive has to be the main goal for the European Union. As you said, many countries are performing extremely well, and of course there is a shift going on a global level, and so it's not.
Isn't it a danger for Europe, for the success of Europe, or for the role that Europe played in the recent centuries?
Well, I think things are changing. That's a reality, and it's not a given that Europe is wealthy and that it's the best place to live. So without hard work, it will not stay like this. And I think that trying to stay competitive, it has to be the main goal for the European Union. Also, I think it has to be the main goal because I think for us living in democracies and living in the Western world, it is important that our systems stay attractive. And without economic success, without good living conditions, it will be extremely difficult that our systems are more attractive than others. So I think from my perspective, especially if people compare between China or the Middle East or Europe or the US, I think the only way that our system stays attractive to people is if we manage to live peacefully together, but also economically successful.
If we stay on the European ground, the European Commission is withholding substantial funds from Poland and Hungary because their governments are pursuing policies that are not to the liking of the mainstreams in Brussels. We in Hungary, we often have the feeling that there is political pressure on a country. If it's not working, there comes legal pressure, different procedures, and then a financial pressure. What do you think about this? Is this method helping the European Union?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to have rules for the European Union and how to work together. Second, I learned in my days as foreign minister, and to be honest, I didn't know it in the same sense before, but I learned how diverse the European Union still is. The slogan of the European Union has always been united in diversity. And I think that's still a reality. The European Union has 27 member states. Yes, we are all in Europe. Yes, we are all united in the European Union. But there are still big differences. And there's a lot of diversity. And the South is now not like the North, and the East is not like the West. And so I think we have to find a way to deal with each other. And from my perspective, especially if times are challenging, with the war in Ukraine, with the ideas of decoupling between China and the US, with the fact that we now live in a split world again, I think especially in these days, it's extremely important that we find a way to stay as united as possible, and probably also respect that countries are different, and that there's a difference between liberal governments and center-right or far-right governments. And I think also what is important is I was always a fan of the idea of a European Union based on the idea of subsidiarity, so that there are European decisions on big issues and also room for member states or for regions to decide for themselves on smaller or more regional issues.
There is also a discussion about unanimity in the European Union. Olaf Scholz, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, would like to see, and he expressed it several times recently, that the EU foreign policy decisions should be without unanimity in the European Union. Do you see it necessary to do this step, or it's dangerous because that way smaller countries like ours could be marginalized?
I think this is an extremely difficult question. I don't have a strong opinion on that, because in the past, of course, I was always supporting the idea that there has to be consensus among all 27 member states, especially because of the fact that it's easier for small countries if the others need you to agree. On the other hand, the bigger the European Union is, with 27 member states, it's sometimes extremely difficult to find an agreement among all 27. So I think there are arguments for both ideas, advantages and disadvantages. I don't have a very clear and strong opinion on that question.
I think from a Hungarian perspective, it looks very dangerous, because on one hand, if you have the legal and financial pressure that you don't get funds that are yours, basically, because you are a member and you do and pay for something, and you do your whole system in the European Union, and you don't get it, and then on the other hand also anonymity is taken away, then what kind of Europe can it be?
Yeah, at the moment there are some issues where there's a need for consensus of 27, and on other issues you just need a majority. So I think there is a system at the moment, and with my experience, normally there are not big change happening in the European Union. So I think the most likely scenario is that it will stay as it is.
You spend a lot of time, as we can read in the press, in the United States. How do you see the future of the United States? Elections are coming. There is a President Biden, and there is also a big challenge between President Trump and Ron DeSantis. What do you think? Who will be the candidate for the Republican Party?
I don't know. I think nobody knows.
Who would you support? Who would be better for the world?
I'm not that much involved in the U.S. Presidential elections, and to be honest, I get this question nearly every week, and my answer is always the same. I just don't know. I think we will know early enough. Unfortunately, I think probably on the main question on a global level at the moment, the Republicans and the Democrats are united, and I don't really like the position. It's on China. From my perspective, especially for us in Europe, it would be good to find a way to deal with China in a way that we can keep our economic exchange and our quite important trade relations. And unfortunately, I think we now live more and more in a split world, and the position of the Republicans and the position of the Democrats is the same, and the idea is to decouple from China, which is not easy. Secondly, probably a good strategy for the US, but from my perspective, definitely not for us. So I hope that on this big international issue, there will be a change of position in the US, and if not, I hope that we as Europe find our own position for that question, because I think this is something that would weaken our economy a lot if these trade relations are not as they were in the last years.
What do you think? Why are these changes happening? Because we in Hungary, we gained our democracy basically 1990 with the first free elections, and we were raised with Francis Fukuyama's theories on end of history, that because they have with the win of democracies all over the world and connectivity between all over the world, we can have freedom and no war forever. Why is it changing? Because from a Hungarian perspective, it's very difficult to understand and to see. We learned it, we were raised basically that way, that we are living in a global world. We are a small, open economic country. That's our only chance to have good economic relations on the one side, and the strong security policy if we are dealing with everybody. Now, from one day to another, we have the feeling that, oh, what is going on? Why do we have to change this?
Well, I think it's a question of competition. It's a question also of competition of different systems. It's unfortunately also a question of influence in other parts of the world. But I have the same feeling like you have. I grew up in a globalized world, and I like the idea of working together and of bringing the world a bit closer together, and not to live in a split and separate world. So and then in a divided world. So I hope that there will be a change of position, but at the moment, I think there is consensus in the US on the idea of decoupling, which is probably very difficult in classical industries and supply chains, but in technology and some other areas it's easier. And I think as long as the US has this clear vision, there will be a lot of pressure on the European Union how to deal with that.
And do you see the possibility of a military conflict with China and with the NATO?
At the moment, not. But of course, I think the more divided our world is, the bigger on the long run, the danger also of a military conflict. So I think that's the positive outcome of globalization, that if you have international trade, if you have a lot of tourism, a lot of people exchange, if you work together in the UN, in multilateral systems, then you get closer to each other. And if you don't do that, and if the world is divided, of course also the risk is higher.
There is a military conflict in our closest neighborhood. Russia attacked and started to invade the Ukraine, which conflict basically started 2014. It was stopped with the Crimea crisis, but after that Russia decided and attacked Ukraine 1.5 years ago. How do you see this conflict? What is your opinion about this?
Yeah, it's terrible that we have this conflict in our close neighborhood. I think it's terrible to see how many people lost their lives and how many families and people are suffering. In Ukraine, I hope that there is a way out of this conflict and that there is at least a ceasefire at a certain point of time.
How can it be achieved, a ceasefire?
I hope that at a certain point of time there will be no negotiations. I think there will be no solution on a battlefield, because in the end Russia will always be a country with nuclear weapons, and I think that the defeat is not an option for President Putin. So I hope that at a certain point of time we will have negotiations and hopefully an end of this war.
And how can it be helped by the Western world, by the European countries? Because as I see, there are two different and globally there are two different opinions. The one is telling, yeah, Ukraine can win this war, we have to give enough weapons and deliver enough weapons. And on the other hand, other people say, no, we have to stop this and push the sides to negotiation.
Well, I think, first of all, Ukraine deserves support, and it's good that there is such a strong support from the US and also from the European Union at the moment. And secondly, I think, yes, at a certain point of time, I hope that there will be negotiations, and I'm very happy that also other players outside of Europe, like leaders from the Middle East, for example, tried to push President Putin to end this war. And yeah, I hope that there will be a way out.
Middle East, you are also an honorary advisor at the Abraham Accords Peace Institute, which advocates for strengthening the relations between Israel and the Arab world. Could you tell us more about it? How do you see the situation in the Middle East and between Israel and the Arab countries?
I spend about 50% of my time in Middle East now, because I started some businesses there, and to be honest, for me it's totally impressive what happened with the Abraham Accords. So it was unthinkable 10 years ago to have direct flights between Israel and Gulf countries, to have tourism, exchange of people, trade relations on this level. So it's incredible what happened with the Abraham Accords, but I think it's still a lot of work to be done to keep these new and good relations, and secondly also to have more and more countries to join the Abraham Accords. But it's changing the region. It brings security, peace, and yeah. It's from my perspective, it's something that has been unthinkable a few years ago.
I would open one more topic. This is artificial intelligence. If we look back, probably the biggest technical development or technical change that happened in the last year was ChatGPT and all the artificial intelligence developments that we realized. How do you see it? Do you see it? Do we need regulation for this? Do you see a threat, or do you see more possible advantage in this?
I'm excited. I see a lot of advantages. I think it will change the world in many areas, and I think we should be very open, and we should use it. So of course there is a need for regulation and all that, but first of all, I'm sure it will change the world to the better. And if we look back, how our world developed, it was always technological progress which made our world a better place. If you look around, I think probably most of the people here older than 45 or 50 years old would not be alive without the level of medical care we have in our century. So all that is because of technological changes, and so I'm very excited, and I think there will be huge opportunities, and we should use it.
Last question. It's more a personal question. Last year you said that you had given up politics forever, and it's your final world. Do you see any chance of returning to the political arena in some form, if not to Austria, on a European or at the international level?
Probably it's not the most interesting answer, but I feel extremely comfortable with the things I do now. I spent 10 years in government. I have the impression that I contributed, and my team and I tried to do our best for our country, and I'm very happy now to do something else.
What would you give as a last advice for the Hungarian people? How do you see the future of Hungary?
No need to advise, and no need for advice. I think that Hungary is a country with huge potential. I have a lot of friends here. I know a lot of extremely talented young people, so I'm very optimistic. I think if societies manage it to work hard and to try hard to be economically successful, there's huge potential everywhere, and I have the impression that the Hungarian economy has been growing extremely well in the last 10 years, and I think there's still a lot of potential.
Mr. Chancellor, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the conversation, and I'm very happy that you stay with us and enjoy MCC Fest.
Thank you very much for inviting me.